Welcome agents. Nearly a week ago, Kotaku interviewed Yannick from Massive about The Division 2. Now the article was titled The Division 2's developers have a plan for overcoming the backlash. And to be honest, I completely disregarded it, but now having read through it, I think it's worth talking about because it talks about what's coming with the second raid, the new expeditions coming in July, among other things like PC and console balancing. Now today I want to go over all of the important points of this article and discuss them. If you enjoy this video, I'd appreciate a like down below, subscribe for dedicated Division content, and let's dive into this. Okay, so the article basically talks about the underbelly of the game being exposed after the honeymoon phase and how Massive plan to overcome that. Now I think this is particularly relevant right now, with the game suffering some of the same problems the Division had, and a few of its own. Now I've talked about these in previous videos numerous times, I'm kind of beating a dead horse here, but just to name a few, we got gear score being irrelevant, brutal RNG and underwhelming loot, no raid matchmaking, lack of build diversity, and of course there is so much more to this. But let's see what the devs had to say. When we had the very positive feedback at launch, we knew there would be a moment where the honeymoon would be over and people would start scratching beneath the surface. We knew all along that no matter how well we designed and prepared our game, the way people play it might be different, and they will exhaust it in a way we cannot simulate in testing, Yannick said. So, they will find things that need to be improved. Now, I don't think this particular statement could be any closer to the truth and where we are as a community right now. Without a doubt, when the Division 2 launched and I played through the campaign, I was very, very impressed. It was much better than the Division 1 launch, and I'm sure most of you felt the same way. All the critics gave it really high reviews, 9 out of 10s, 8 out of 10s, because it was a very good game. For $60, £60, whatever, you are getting a good amount, you're getting a very good amount of content and good game for that money. But it's very clear that when you start peeling back the layers, there are some real issues with the game. Now, Yannick went on to talk about post-launch development and how it's different from the Division. He recalled that addressing the First Division's problems and turning it around, which they eventually started doing with its 1.4 patch a year and a half after release, was initially a scramble. With the first game, especially pre-1.4, we had a lot of pressure from the community and we were trying to answer all the fires that were out there, Yannick said. Everything was an emergency and everything had to be handled as soon as possible. Now you can definitely see with the Division 2, the updates appear to be more methodical, more structured, but certainly they appear to be a lot more often than the Division was. Now as of this video going live, it'll be the 24th of June, so we've actually got a maintenance coming out tomorrow, which is the 25th of June. We're going to have then State of the Game, followed by maintenance probably on Thursday or Friday, depending on what happens. So as of right now, we're getting maintenances and updates probably once or twice a week, which to me sounds like there's stuff going on that they need to handle as soon as possible, the same way they did with the original one. Now, I'm sure for them this feels like the right way of doing it, but I have to say, if this is the reason why no one at Massive has even acknowledged the real problems with the game right now, and I'm not talking about weird stairs and stuff, I'm talking about, loot and RNG and all the other stuff, I'm not sure this is working, at least from a community perspective. Now the article went on to say the following. And what about when the game's raid launches and everyone seems to run the same build with the same skills activated? We're kind of working on different timelines when it comes to addressing the balancing and producing content like the raid, Yannick said. Even if we know there's sometimes an optimum way to actually beat the raid, that doesn't mean we should hold onto that content until the balancing is perfect. Yannick also floated that while the Division 2's first raid rewarded damage-based builds, maybe the next raid is going to be focused on survivability or skill builds, all these kinds of things. Okay, so there are two things that I took away from this statement. Firstly, the devs will likely know there is an optimum way to beat the raid, and that's obvious because they'll be testing it and whatever, or any content, I'd imagine, but they won't hold off from releasing that content because the balance is not perfect. Secondly, the next raid, which comes as part of the next episode, which is DC Outskirts Expedition, will likely not be the DPS type raid we've just had. Now I have to say the main issue with the current raid is the lack of build diversity required to defeat it, among other things. Now this isn't really a raid issue though. I mean, it is in the sense that the raid has been built that way. It is a DPS check, and that's very obvious because there's not a whole lot of team mechanics in it. It's more about just doing the most amount of damage as possible. But the whole game itself lacks any real build diversity, meaning that even if the second raid added some mechanics that allowed it to be more diverse, there's no build diversity in the game to supplement the raid. You have to have build diversity in the game to supplement a raid that allowed that. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. Otherwise, you're going to have a raid that asks for skill builds and no one's going to have skill builds, because what's the point when the rest of the game doesn't require it? So for me, they have to fix the core build diversity in the game before they release the next raid. But that said, based on what they first said here, that's not going to matter. Ultimately, what they're going to do is they'll release the raid as it is, and if the balance is not perfect, they'll do that at a later stage, because that's how it is. So I'm not sure if I like that. I don't like the idea of the raid coming out and, people not having the builds for it, because the game doesn't allow them to do that. So we'll have to wait and see. But I just hope that the next raid isn't a DPS raid again, and I'm pretty sure it won't be, and we're going to move on to stuff about that shortly. So moving on, the article talks about raid balancing between console and PC and what they intend to do for the next raid. To me, it's very clear that the current raid was not tested on console whatsoever. Small hitboxes for almost every encounter means the raid is not controller friendly at all. And that's not to say it's impossible on console, because it's certainly not. People have cleared it very, very quickly once you get the mechanics down. But it's very clear that this was tested on PC with no consideration for console players. The article discusses what the devs intend to do. Rather than designing separate stats and encounters for PC and console versions of the game's second raid, which is slated for a full release, the developers instead want to make requests of players on either device that are more fair. For the next raid, we're looking at how do we change the encounters and the fight dynamic to try not to penalise console players because of the accuracy and aiming and all of that, Yannick said. So maybe rely on less on that and more on actual team play. So that's one way of trying to take these learnings from the second one. Now, I think this is probably one of the biggest issues with the raid right now on console, aside from the matchmaking and the 8-player requirement, and they're separate issues. Now, it's no surprise to me that the next raid will focus less on whether you have a mouse and keyboard, but instead implement mechanics that require more team-based play. Now, I will always refer back to Destiny, because I really think they understand raids really, really well. I mean, raids generally are a success, and as long as you've got a good team and you understand mechanics, it really doesn't matter how much damage damage is still important. Let's not forget that. Yes, DPS is important, but what's more important is making sure you're getting the core mechanics for that raid down. If you get that stuff down and you've got that down to a T, then it really doesn't matter how much damage you're doing, because ultimately whatever you're doing will be enough. So that's how Destiny does their raids, and I think the Division 2 and the devs need to take that from Destiny and implement it some way here. This needs to be more team play, and from the sounds of it here, that's what they're going to be doing. It's going to be more team-based, so that way console and PC, there's not this huge gap between, hitting hitboxes, and it's more friendly towards console players. And I think that's why a lot of people, again, aside from the 8-player requirement and lack of matchmaking, which we'll come on to, but aside from that, that's why a lot of console players simply have not done the raid. So next up, and they discuss raid matchmaking. Now, as the devs have already confirmed they're working on an in-game LFG solution, but they could not confirm whether this will be ready for the next raid. In my opinion, I think the developers should really consider the impact of releasing the raid without it. The community are not happy, especially on console. Actually console and PC, but nobody's really happy that matchmaking wasn't part of the first raid, because ultimately it pushed a lot of people out. How many people really have 7 friends to actually play the game with? And it's okay going to these external LFG sites, but that's not good for the game. What you want to be doing is you want to be in the game, matchmaking with people, and then going into the raid and playing it. That's the only real way that you're going to learn how to play it as well. Now, I really hope the developers make sure this is in the game before the next raid comes out. My suggestion would be to not commit to any date of release until they know the LFG will be ready. Moving on, and the article discussed a little bit more about expeditions, the new PvE content coming with the first episode. Those expeditions will consist of 3 playable areas, one unlocked in the game per week, give or take, and will expand on the kind of puzzle solving that excited players at launch when they spotted coded missions in the game that led to the appearance of elite enemies called hunters. The expeditions, which are framed around the story of trying to figure out what happened to a lost convoy, are really more focused on exploration logic, this kind of thing. So we kind of wanted to play with the ciphers and all these things we had at launch with the game when everyone had to decipher how to progress, he said. We're not holding your hand, we're just opening the area and saying, okay, investigate it and find out what happened. As players investigate, they'll unlock new areas and acquire more treasure. So I always thought that somewhat similar to what we had, in respect to ciphers would be coming back to the game, because I felt like, at least for me, that this is when I was most engaged with the PvE side of the game. But with that said, having the new PvE activity based around this kind of does concern me a little bit. And the reason I say that is because there'll be a lot of the community that don't want to do that don't want to find puzzles and all that sort of stuff. And whilst you can't cater to everyone, you should really cater to the majority, and I don't think the majority want that. My concern again is, what about replayability? If you find all the clues and do all the puzzles, then I can't imagine there really being any replayability value here, unless it acts like the Underground. If that's the case, whereby you solve ciphers, riddles, and use logic to make your way through various biomes, then there could be a lot of replayability here, but it has to be worth it. They talk about treasure, but they need to fix the RNG loot issues before they start talking about treasure and rewards, because if the same RNG and the same loot that's currently in the game is there when this comes out, then no one's going to play everyone will play the activity once, they'll do it, they'll realise at the end of it it's taken them a long time, they haven't got good rewards, and they won't do it again. And that's the real problem. There's no point in having all of this content if the bones of the game aren't there. And at the moment, the RNG and loot aren't there, so let's hope they fix the RNG and loot first, and then they release this content. Moving on, and the article talked about something I think a lot of people have an issue with, but it's not a huge problem. When I mentioned my own desire to be able to take over the game's many control point zones without fear that enemies would take them back, he pointed out there is a system reason for allowing that to happen. Players can basically fight ever tougher and more rewarding battles to retake them. It's a way to generate infinitely replayable content. But hey, there might be good news for me. That being said, we are looking at new ways and new dynamics we can put in the open world that might actually answer that itch, he said. So, to me that's good news, I think. I personally hate having to retake control points. And whilst I understand the whole replayability kind of factor associated with this, it just reminded me of what the Division 2 is all about. Getting your build, update, patch, maintenance, whatever, losing your build and repeat. And that's the same here. You could do a level 4 control point, it could take you a very long time, you could get all the rewards, and then give it 5-10 minutes, it's going to be retaken over and you have to do it all over again. And for me personally, I don't like that. So I'm glad to hear that there could be something coming that could change that, possibly. You guys have to let me know what you think about that, because I don't know if that's just me, but I hate looking at my map and realising all the control points are taken. And again, I don't have the time as well to take them all back, basically. But the point is, I hate looking at my map and seeing everything being taken over. And it would be nice to see what you guys think of that. I don't know if that's just a me thing, or that's a problem, for the whole community. But it does look as though something could possibly come in to counter that. The final paragraph from the article is a little hard to stomach. Ultimately, Yannick said, things do feel like they're going in the right direction, and the concerns of the Division 2's player base aren't rattling the game's developers. We have a pretty good idea about what they want, and a lot of that aligns with where we want the game to go, Yannick said. So then it's just about putting in the work to adjusting things. Now for me personally, this is a little hard to stomach, a little bit hard to believe. I'm not taking anything away from the devs, because I'm sure they're working very hard, but the devs have made zero acknowledgement of the main concerns with the game. Loot, RNG, gear score, build diversity, and so much more has been for the most part ignored. So when they say that they know what we want, and this is what they want as well, I don't quite understand why they're not talking about the things that we want. Rather than talking about the things that we don't want, i.e. weird stairs, or doing a whole state of the game about NPC behaviour and how to code it, which, for some people might be interesting, but ultimately, for the majority of people, that doesn't mean anything. What we want to know is, when's loot going to be looked at? When's the RNG going to be looked at? When will gear score be viable? When are we going to get build diversity? And we want all of this stuff answered. Not even answered, we just want an acknowledgement that this stuff is being looked into. Now, I'm sure it is, because there's no way the developers are just disregarding the countless forum posts and Twitter messages and all that stuff. I'm sure they've seen all of this, but at the moment they're not acknowledging it. So to the community, it's just being completely ignored. So it's hard to stomach this particular statement, because I'm sure they're doing the most that they can, but I really wish they wouldn't ignore us as a community and actually just acknowledge the issues. So there you go, guys. I'm sorry if this sounded like a bit of a ramble, but I wanted to look at this particular article with Kotaku, dissect it a little bit, give a bit, my own opinions, because whilst I like some of the stuff in there, I like the idea of the second raid being less DPS focused, and I like the fact that control points could no longer just be taken over, and I like some of the things they talked about. I think this was just part of the game's progression. Ultimately, it doesn't talk about, to me, the actual question of the whole article about the backlash from the community hasn't really been answered here, because ultimately they've not talked about the issues that are in the game, and certainly they're not talking about it right now. Let's hope that with Wednesday's State of the Game, which will be on the 26th, let's hope they talk about some of these issues, and I feel like I've said this for the last 6 weeks. Let's hope they talk about these issues, and that way we know they are actually trying to do something about them. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Leave your comments down below as well. I'll also leave a link to the full article in the description if you want to go and check it out for yourself. With that said, until the next one, Epic out.